Welcome back to Hot Takes and Deep Dives, and I am here with the person who has conceived the Jonathan Larson Project, in which she has unearthed about 20 undiscovered songs of Jonathan Larson, playwright, composer of Rent, Tick, Tick, Boom. Hi, Jennifer Tepper.
Hi, I'm so excited to chat with you about the show.
How are you?
I'm great. Today's our last day before tech, so very excited for the Jonathan Larson Project to start the tech process.
So just to be clear, this begins performances in the East Village at the Orpheum Theater on Valentine's Day.
Yes.
Talk to me like I'm 3. Well, because I don't work in theater.
Sure.
And I'm sure many listeners don't work in theater. What is the tech process?
The tech process for a show, and I'm glad that you asked, let's demystify the tech process. You spend weeks in the rehearsal studio rehearsing with actors, with the music director, choreographer, director, the conceiver in this case. You put the show together without all of the technical elements. So the design elements, the band, the things that come into play once you're in the theater space. So basically at the theater right now, our incredible production team and designers are running around getting ready. And in the rehearsal room, the actors and the creative team are getting ready. And tomorrow we smush together in one big theater family.
And where is the tech? Do you do it at the Orpheum?
At the theater. So the Orpheum Theater, I'm so excited. This is our house for the Jonathan Larson Project. It's such a historic space. It opened as a performance space in 1904.
But also it makes complete. I mean, was
East Village.
Were in your mind? Was it always going to be in the East Village?
Our dream was the Orpheum, and the producers of the show, who are also the founders of 54 Below, produced Stomp. So they were at the Orpheum for many years, and we thought how wonderful to be at a historic theater that existed during Jonathan's time, that he would have walked by on his way to doing Rent at New York Theater Workshop. We're very excited. They're our neighbors. It felt like the perfect spot for the show.
I actually saw the concert version of this.
Yes.
In 2018.
Oh my God, I'm so happy you saw it.
Because, well, first of all, I am, and like listeners of this show know, I am a huge Rent head. Mm-hmm. But on top of that, like specifically why I was invited to that performance was because a very good friend of mine, Natalie Tenenbaum, was she the music director?
Yes.
For that?
So Natalie was our music director for the 2018 concert version and the album we made. She is just one of my favorite human beings and like a monster on the keys. If you haven't checked her out on social media, you will have never seen piano playing like this in your life. So she was also the co-arranger of the show, and she stayed on board as our co-music arranger.
Actually, she did some of the arrangements for Mean Girls on Broadway. Lauren Michaels loves her.
She's a genius. Our process musically has been unlike any other show because, the show started out as demos at the Library of Congress that were Jonathan Larson singing with a keyboard in many cases that had no sheet music, that hadn't been fully musically realized. And Charlie Rosen, who's our music supervisor and orchestrator and one of Natalie's, closest collaborators on a lot of projects, he and Natalie and I, during the initial process in 2018, turned those demos and like those, 1984, here's Jonathan Larson in his apartment into something that a band and a cast could fully realize musically, thinking about Jonathan's intentions, what music he might have been listening to at the time, how to represent his songs.
How many were there at 54?
We did 12 performances over the course of 6 days. So it was really thrilling. And every night I looked in the audience and people were like, we can't believe he wrote this song, or wow, we didn't realize that he was writing in different genres.
To make this clear, you basically went to the Larson Estate.
Yes.
Okay, so maybe we should go back and be like, what's your path to Jonathan Larson?
Sure.
Like, were you just a big Rent head?
I definitely was. I grew up in South Florida, and I like to always mention I was dressed as Mimi on my bat mitzvah sign-in board, popping out of a pile of Rent playbills. So it really goes back to being 12. But just, no, seriously, it's like I was a child Rent head, like so many of us. Child Rent head, that's funny. And was just a fan of Jonathan's as a theater kid in Florida. And then in 2014, I was really honored to put together a tiny 5-song unheard Jonathan Larson concert in the lobby of City Center before a performance of Tick, Tick, Boom. Encores did Tick, Tick, Boom with Lin-Manuel Miranda, Karen Olivo, and Leslie Odom Jr. And so I put together, it was 5 songs. It was on like a rickety stage in the City Center lobby, and it was so great. And I found those songs, as a theater historian from like a little bit of research. And at that point, I started talking to the Larson family about expanding it into a full evening. And to do that, going to the Library of Congress in DC, where all of Jonathan's work lives, his cassette tapes, his journals, his scripts, his lyric sheets, his sheet music, everything that was in his apartment that was related to his work. When he tragically passed away, the family gave to the Library of Congress. So after that concert in 2014, 2014, I spent a couple years going on multiple trips because when I first went there, I thought, oh my God, I can't put together a show of this unless I look at everything and listen to everything. And there was so much work there. There were so many songs. There are songs in our show that are pop songs that Jonathan wrote that he dreamed of being on the radio. There are songs that he wrote for musicals that were never produced. There are songs he wrote for abandoned projects. There are songs cut from Rent and Tick, Tick, Boom. And it was just so thrilling to figure out how a lot of these songs fit together into a new theater piece. A lot of them were written for like one night benefits and performed like one time.
Well, let me ask you, in the Jonathan Larson project, in the show that you're mounting, do you explicitly say like this was cut, or would that be in like a program, like this was cut from Rent?
It's a great question. We didn't want to do a show that was like at all. And then Jonathan wrote this. The show stands on its own. It's about a community of people that come together and how the songs fit into their lives. But definitely for folks who want, we will have that whole
you have to,
that whole like backstory. Right now we're contemplating whether to do it like via a handout when you walk out of the theater or something that people can look at on their way home. So we'll definitely, every day in rehearsal, we're going really deep into the history, and the actors will ask me a question and Jonathan wrote this when he was doing that. We've brought a lot of background to what we're doing. And so we want to share that with audiences for sure.
It's funny, at the end of the last episode I did of last year, the last episode I released in December of 2024 was like a year end, like here's everything we loved in theater this year, and like here's maybe what to look forward to in 2025. And I mentioned in that episode how I had recently rediscovered the No Day But Today DVD featurette from the Rent movie. I found it on YouTube. It's like completely available on YouTube. And I basically was telling my friend who's also very into theater, truly it's just human interest story. So, and like if you're into theater, then it's even better. But I think anybody would get, if you're into music period, this is for you. And it's funny that then suddenly, like right after that was when I heard that this was coming to off Broadway. I knew in the back of my mind that I had seen this, but it's just so great.
Yeah, I love
the
that
synchronicities.
We've been finding a lot of moments of synchronicity and feeling like, Lauren Marcus, who's one of my close friends who's in the show, we both had Jonathan Larson posters fall off of our wall while we were at rehearsal. And we feel like the synchronicity of, I've had a Jonathan Larson project, concert poster on my wall for years, and she's had a Rent poster on her wall for years. They both fell. We're like, someone's watching us, some synchronicity is happening. But really it's, Jonathan is in the zeitgeist. His dream was to create a musical and create work that would collide musical theater and pop rock music, and to write The Hair of the 90s. And the fact that he did, and he changed Broadway, and he tragically wasn't around to see it, I think just
people need to understand he died the night before the first preview at New York Theater Workshop.
Yes. He very tragically passed away when he was 35, just before his 36th birthday, and of an aortic aneurysm. And so he never got to experience the immense, meaningful impact his work has had on the world.
Cultural phenomenon. I mean, this is like the most zeitgeisty. What do you think has had the most, has kind of, I guess, Hamilton.
It's the impact is immeasurable. Definitely Hamilton. And, when Lin-Manuel Miranda knew that I was working on the Jonathan Larson project, he hired me to work on the Tick, Tick, Boom movie. So I was actually his historian consultant on the Tick, Tick, Boom movie and got to work on that as well. And we talked so much during that process, and we have during this process as well, about we wouldn't have any of the musicals we've had since 1996 without Rent. Rent opened up Broadway. It opened up audiences. It opened up writers to really, kind of combine everything.
I don't think there's any contemporary musical theater without Rent.
Totally. It changed everything. And if you look at the few years in the 90s before Rent, and it was a sad time.
Tell me what were the big, or what was happening on Broadway like 3 years
it's a good question.
Before let's say like 1992 to 1995. Or do you want to say Rent happened in 94? What do you want to say?
So Rent started being developed at New York Theater Workshop in the early 90s. But, while of course there were many great musicals in the early 90s, I'm not saying that there weren't. I'm a big fan of a lot of them. Musical theater was very much like still going with that classical sound, that traditional sound. There weren't a lot of original musicals on Broadway. And this wasn't necessarily because people weren't writing them. Obviously, Jonathan was writing them. A lot of it was the tragedy of the AIDS crisis and the fact that Broadway lost a generation of theater makers theaters and theater goers. And, you know, in the 90s, there were years in the late 80s and early 90s. It was also about the state of New York, the state of Times Square. You know, Broadway is never divorced from what's going on in the world overall. So, you know, even though people like Jonathan Larson were writing musicals that were contemporary and they weren't necessarily getting produced, there were a lot of great musicals in the early 90s, but it wasn't something with the impact of Rent until Rent came along and won the Pulitzer and the Tony Award in 1996. And honestly, one of the things I find most fascinating is because I've written about the history of the theaters themselves, the Nederlander, where Rent opened and where it ran for many years and became one of the longest running musicals in Broadway history, was empty until Rent. You know, it was often
like
a place,
decrepit.
it was deserted.
Yeah.
For those, like, you know, you mentioned Rent heads, for people who slept on the line in those early years of the Rent rush line, it was, you know, it was a scary place. It was deserted. People would often rehearse Broadway shows at the Nederlander because it was cheaper than a rehearsal studio. Right now we have 41 Broadway houses, and every single time one is empty, there's, you know, 10 Broadway shows fighting for it. Back then, half of the theaters were empty. And so I did learn an incredible story from Jonathan Larson's friend, Jonathan Burkhart, about one day they actually rode their bikes past the Nederlander and it was empty, and they would often break into empty, abandoned New York buildings. And so they actually did. They pulled open the door and went in the Nederlander and stood on stage. And Jonathan was like, why isn't anyone producing my shows? I would love to have a show at a theater like this. And so when the producers of Rent were going around to Broadway theaters after Jonathan passed and trying to pick one for Rent, that was one of the reasons they chose the Nederlander, was because Jonathan had actually stood on that stage and been there.
Oh my God. That's unbelievable. Actually, I remember him from No Day But Today.
Yeah.
Was this the guy who was like his childhood friend?
You know, so Jonathan Larson had a very full life, a lot of friends. Jonathan Burkhart was a friend since his early 20s, but Matt O'Grady is maybe who you're thinking of, who's a childhood friend.
Okay. I mean, this is really in the weeds of that documentary. Like, which talking head is this? I love that story.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's incredible. You know, a lot of the stories I've heard from his family or his friends or, you know, from research have impacted our show. And I think if you have never heard of Jonathan Larson, you could come to the Jonathan Larson Project and think these songs are stunning. I'm really moved by this. I love this as a show. But if you have any knowledge, if you're a Rent head, if you love Tick, Tick, Boom, if you're at all in this, you'll see like 30 Easter eggs. You know, you'll see these moments where you'll go, oh, that's a reference. There's some in the costumes. There's some in the scenic design. There's some in the show. There's musical motifs that are sort of Easter eggs. So a lot of it is for, you know, people who love this.
Is there a book for that? Like, are there scenes? It's not a concert.
It's not a concert. It's a full musical. There's not a traditional book. I would say there's a narrative. The characters go through experiences over the course of the night. We know who people are. There are arcs, but you know, our show is not Cats, but it's really funny. Cats has a book. It won the best book Tony Award, but there's no dialogue. So our show is not Cats, but it is interesting the way that there are certain musicals you could say a book is really a story, and our show does have a story, but it's linked by theme and like dramatic, you know, dramatic arcs that don't have to do with dialogue.
A story that I had heard when people saying like, oh, like, what do you think Jonathan would have done next after Rent? His friends say that his next work would have been overtly political.
Yes. I love that you mentioned that. They've said the same thing to me in interviews too. You know, what's so amazing is when you look at Rent as a historian, Rent is obviously so political. And, you know, the way that he brought issues like the AIDS epidemic to the forefront and the way that he was championing, you know, queer people and women and, you know,
way
so much
before it was in vogue.
Absolutely.
Like, people don't get that Rent was happening on stage. That is the reason that I became so attached to it at that particular time in my life. There was hardly, I mean, if you're looking at the year 1996, what representation is there? This is when on Friends, when it was a joke that Ross's ex was gay.
Yes, totally.
Like that was a punchline.
Totally.
And they used to make fun of Chandler for like seeming gay. Like we weren't even at Will and Grace yet.
No. And Jonathan, you know, he was in New York. He was in the community. He wanted to do something where people that he knew and loved would be represented on stage. He lost several friends to AIDS at young ages. You know, a lot of his friends were queer people. He wanted to, you know, write La Boheme for the new generation. So, you know, so I want to say, like you said, Rent is political, but a lot of his friends felt like his next show would have been maybe about like presidential politics or something like that. And so what's amazing amazing is that Jonathan actually wrote a 4-song mini musical in 1989 about presidential elections, and we have some of that material in our
What's
show.
What's it called?
So it was actually for National Lampoon. Do you know, like the magazine?
Of course, yeah.
So National Lampoon, which was, a very popular subversive humor magazine, spun off into an off-Broadway musical that was a huge hit. And so they decided to do a Broadway musical about the future of presidential elections. And in 1989, the idea was that a couple of different writers would write songs for it. It was supposed to open at what is now the Walter Kerr, where Hadestown is. It was a big opportunity for Jonathan. And he wrote these 4 really fascinating political songs for it. And then the show never happened. It never got produced. I think he did maybe one of the songs in a concert at some point. But like a lot of the material in the Jonathan Larson Project, it really has not been heard. It was never recorded. And so some of that material, I feel like we're getting as close as we can to that musical you mentioned that he might have written next, which is overtly political.
Tell me about Superbia.
Yeah, I love that you asked about Superbia. So Superbia, Jonathan, when he graduated college, he went to school at Adelphi on Long Island. He moved to the city right away, and his dream was to write a musical adaptation for the stage of 1984, the George Orwell novel. And he did, and he couldn't get the rights. He couldn't get it produced. There's one song in our show that's incredible. That's from 1984 that he wrote when he was 22 years old. And when he couldn't get the rights, he thought, well, I'll just write my own futuristic dystopian musical if I can't write 1984. And so Superbia was this musical that was Jonathan's. It was kind of like the pinnacle of a lot of things he wanted to do, but it never got fully produced. It was futuristic. It was about a world that's dominated by, if you read the Wikipedia page, which is very well put together, you're like the characters in Tick, Tick, Boom. You're going, wait, what is this about? Robots, aliens? It gets a little bit, it's like a musical theater writer's kind of first original like fever dream where it incorporates a lot of things. Like it basically predicts social media. It's like about the fact that people will no longer be humans. They'll just be like faces on a TV screen. Like some of the stuff is very prescient and like you're like, oh, Jonathan Larson's predicting a lot of things here, but it's confusing. The plot is confusing. He revised it a lot. He worked on it for many years, and it had workshops at the Public and at Playwrights Horizons. One of the workshops is dramatized in Tick, Tick, Boom, and it again, it was never fully produced, but it was the first time that Jonathan really did that thing where he combined musical theater with pop music. And without Superbia, I don't think he would have had the tools to write Rent, and Superbia led to Tick, Tick, Boom because it's talked about in it. So the song from Superbia that's in the Jonathan Larson Project is like incredible, and it's from one of his earliest drafts, and we've turned this I Want song that was for the Superbia protagonist into an I Want song for all 5 of our protagonists. So I feel really proud of what we've done with that song.
What is it like working with an estate? You mentioned that when Jonathan died, his family had the foresight to let's go to his apartment, and I'm sure wherever when he was living like with his parents, and put all of his work into the Library of Congress. Now you're working directly with the family.
Yeah.
So is your point person his sister?
Yeah. Julie Larson, who's his sister, she's been incredible every step of the process. Like she has said yes to me in ways where I'm just amazed. Like honestly, when
what were you surprised she said yes
I
about?
was surprised because when I first started the process, I didn't think that we would find so much material that really had never been heard at all. Jonathan was prolific, and there are some songs that obviously Julie and the family knew and went like, oh yeah, Jonathan was really proud of that in the Superbia reading, or Jonathan tried to get that going for years. We know that song. But then there were also some songs that I found in boxes that he wrote when he had first moved to New York, and these songs resonated so much. One of them is our opening number, Green Street, and some of them, Julie, I have a sibling, like I don't know everything she does every day. Julie was like, I don't even remember this one, but yes, go for it. And so a lot of the yeses that we got from Julie and the family throughout the process, they just trusted us. Like once they knew the intentions behind it, and once I got to know Julie and her sons, who are Jonathan's nephews, Matt and Dylan, have also been really instrumental to the process. I have been like keeping them updated every step of the way. And then Jonathan Mills, who's the person who is in charge of the estate. He's the agent for the estate. Honestly, I've worked with a lot of estates for 54 Below concerts and reunions and things. And the Larson family are the most like artist forward. They just say yes. And they've let us explore Jonathan's work in a way that I think really gives you a window window into him. They've let us share a lot of archival material, letters and, pages from journals that are part of the process. They've just been really, willing to kind of give us a window to his life.
How long is the show scheduled to run?
So we're scheduled to run through June 1st. It's a 16-week limited engagement. But who knows? But we're definitely, we're sticking around at the Orpheum till June 1st.
How long is the show?
The show will be about 90 minutes, but I say this
perfect
the day before tech. It could be 95. I feel pretty confident we'll be at 90, between 90 and 100.
My friends always make fun of me because I'm always, the first thing I usually say when I exit a movie or a theater is, I could have cut that down.
What's so funny that you mentioned that is I'm the queen of the opposite. Obviously, like, I want all the material. I want all the, cut songs, everything. And we actually cut a song from the show this week. I didn't think we would do this, but we cut one of the songs from the Jonathan Larson Project. So we're making cuts where needed.
On Friday night, I watched Honora, the movie.
Yeah.
I felt like every scene went on 4 times as long as it should. I'm like, are they just replaying scene? I'm like, I know that I'm the first one. I mean, I even said with the Wicked movie, I'm like, I could get this down to like an hour and a half. Anyway.
I get it. I think a lot of audiences are like that these days. We got a lot to do.
Come on, I got a life to live here. So you're compiling these untold stories of Broadway books, and I want to talk about what makes something a hit. So basically, you've gone and interviewed producers, actors, casting directors, costume designers, etc. And you're on your is it your 4th?
So there are 4 books in the Untold Stories of Broadway, yes. And then I just had a 5th book come out that's a different women writing musicals.
Yeah. But for the Untold Stories of Broadway, you're telling the stories through the eyes of the Broadway theater itself.
Yeah.
And you say that the Broadway theater should think of the show that's going into it as if you are a film casting its leading lady. Talk to me about the consequence of the theater. Like, what are the stakes? Like, give me extreme examples where it really mattered that this show went into this theater.
Totally. I always think this would make a fascinating game of Monopoly, but only for super nerds. The theater has a big effect on a show's success, but it's about timing. It's about the size of the theater, the location of the theater. One of the most interesting things that probably speaks to what you're talking about is the Richard Rodgers Theater, where Hamilton currently is, by far has more Best Musical Tony winners than any other theater. And you're going like, wait, what? So if we go there, our show will get the Tony? And not quite, but it is true that it is one of the most coveted theaters. And so some of the most coveted shows go there. And it's sort of like a catch-22. So the Richard Rodgers has 2 levels, which if you have 2 levels, your pricing system can be a lot better basically than if you have 3, because people don't want to pay as much for the balcony, understandably so. It's centrally located. It has a raked audience, which means there's not a lot of obstructed views. It's all about, the gross potential and how you can like maximize audience enjoyment and how that lends itself to good word of mouth. It's all kind of related. But as we see, a show's not going to go there probably for a long time because of Hamilton. So there's all of these things that can affect whether a show's a success. I remember reading about when Phantom of the Opera was coming to Broadway, it initially was maybe going to go to a smaller theater than the Majestic. And that would have been the difference of billions of dollars. You have to capitalize on what people want to buy tickets to while they want to buy tickets. So it's about a lot of different factors, but it's also really interesting because, as I mentioned, there are 41 Broadway theaters and you don't get to pick, it's that thing where, oh my God, a theater opens, 10 people are fighting over it. It's not like we went, oh, there's 20 theaters Jonathan Larson Project could go into. No, it was like, here's the 3 theaters we could fit into. Oh my God, the Orpheum opened up because a show closed. Theater shows are always at the mercy of circumstances. And, also at the same time, the theater owners are selecting which show gets to come in. So a lot of it is in their hands as well.
Give me an example of a bad location and a great location.
Yeah. One thing we were talking about, so Rent, you were mentioning the history of like the Rush line and Rent heads, and Rush used to be in person. Remember, lotteries used to be in person. Yeah. And one of my favorite shows in the first decade I lived in New York was Spelling Bee. And Spelling Bee benefited so much from literally, this sounds like minutia, but the Wicked lottery was in person and the Spelling Bee lottery was in person 30 minutes later. And if you lost the Wicked lottery, like every night, 200 people would walk over to Spelling spelling bee because they're right next to each other. And so if you're in theaters on 45th Street, there's like, those 6 Broadway theaters on one block, and you're going, oh, we're going to see that next week because you're seeing a show there tonight. So location, it gives impressions to other shows. If you're in a location where there aren't a lot of other theaters, a lot of people talk about how there's the other side of Broadway, aka the theaters that are on closer to 6th Avenue. You might not get as much foot traffic. It's not as much of a thing as it used to be, but it can impact a show's success.
Do you think Rent will be revived in the next 10 years or 20 years?
What's so fascinating about Rent is when it opened, it was not necessarily a period piece. Like, it did start to be written kind of about the late 80s. And by the time we got to the mid 90s, maybe it was a teeny bit of a period piece, but now it's really a period piece. And so the idea of having a revival, you would look at it in a totally different way than the production when it opened originally. And I think that'll be interesting to see. Like Michael Greif, who's one of my favorite directors ever, the original director of Rent, my second job out of college was as his assistant. And he told me also a lot of stories about, when they were doing that original production, everyone in the company would have had experiences similar to the characters on stage, similar to Jonathan's. And now to revive it, you very responsibly need to watch the literature. You probably need to watch the documentaries to see how to plug into that. So, one thing we hope to do is give theater goers that nostalgia of, if you sing Seasons of Love in the shower, I think you come to our show and you're like, I feel like I'm having that Rent experience again. Or if you didn't get to have it, here you are at the beginning of a new Jonathan Larson musical. But for an actual Rent revival, I think it'd be interesting to see how a new generation treats it as a period piece, basically.
A lot of the criticism toward Rent today is that they basically say this is completely unrealistic, but it's because it's literally this very tight window of time before the HIV and AIDS cocktail
totally
came out. It's when they were using AZT as a means to stop the spread or stop. What was AZT specifically used for?
Yeah, it was the AIDS drug at the time. It was the one of the only options open to people. And I think one thing that's interesting, I think this about Sex and the City, which is so important in the zeitgeist. It's like that speaks to women dating in New York in a very specific time. And there's this perception of things like that they're dated, but it's because they so directly and explicitly were of their time. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't treasure them and bring them forth and revive them and all of those things. But it does bring forth more criticism. The more on the cutting edge you are, the more people are going, oh, Will and Grace, well, the way that talks about gay people is dated. And you're like, no, at the time that was revolutionary, but now we've moved forward and that's great. But you can still appreciate what something did in its time.
Something you have at 54 Below, Adam Pascal and Anthony Rapp, they do a two-hander where they kind of sing their songs, obviously, that they've made famous in Rent, but also their own solo works and stuff that they've performed in other musicals. They've been doing this throughout I don't know how long. How long
they've
is
been
that?
doing it for years with us, and
I know they're coming. The point is they're coming back
in June.
Coming back
July.
in June.
We're so lucky to have had them do this a couple of times at 54 Below. I think the first time maybe was even 10 years ago, but the most recent time they did it, I remember they usually do a run of 2 weeks with us, and I went to see Idina Menzel at the Beacon, and she sang from Rent, and then I went to work, and Anthony and Adam were literally singing from Rent, and it's so special to be part of the legacy of Jonathan Larson because they're all, Idina's on Broadway right now. Daphne Ruin Vega is about to do a Shakespeare in the Park. All of these people who are such an important part of Jonathan's legacy through Rent are still doing such extraordinary things in the business.
I keep thinking, how would you revive Rent? What would be the angle? Or if it could be if it could kind of be reinvented.
Yeah.
The way Sunset Boulevard, the way Jamie Lloyd is taking these Andrew Lloyd Webber properties, Evita is about to be revived in a new, interesting way in the West End.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me that tickets are on sale without a star attached.
I know.
By the way.
I know. It's funny, though, when there are these original musicals that are so iconic. There's a reason why a chorus line is almost never re-envisioned. It's done in its initial, concept. And so I do wonder, when I say a new generation would have to look at it, I don't even necessarily think it would need an overhaul or some, extremely new concept. It just would be a period piece in a different way than it was in 96.
What Broadway theater has the most fascinating history?
great question. Honestly, it's hard to pick. It's like picking a favorite, musical basically. But I'm always really fascinated by the Belasco. The Belasco is like where maybe Happy Ending is right now. David Belasco was like an extremely eccentric and aggressive multi-hyphenate. He was a producer, a theater owner. He built an 11-room, essentially like mansion above the theater that's still up there but is abandoned, that had things like a water grotto and like hidden panels to hide from thieves. And like he just had a very fascinating way that he built the theater. And when you go there now as a theater goer, if you look up, you see panels that were built by Tiffany. Like, there's just such amazing things that theater feels very haunted.
Something else that you write about in the Untold Stories of Broadway is that Broadway theaters are connected through these underground passageways.
Yes.
What is the history of this?
A lot of theater owners and even, box office treasurers, actors, people wanted to go back and forth without having to go outside. It's sort of that simple. And then also, there are 3 theaters that are connected on 44th and 45th via a shared stage door where it's the Majestic, where Gypsy is right now, and the Golden and the Jacobs, where the Outsiders and what's at the Golden? Operation Mincemeat. And so they share a stage door, and as silly as it sounds, something like that like begets kind of traditions. So for many years, there have been poker games that have been between all 3 shows in the basements of the theaters because they're connected. I have a friend who's about to start working on Betty Boop, and I immediately said like, oh, do you know about the tunnel? So you can go see something at the Schoenfeld, which is the theater that show is connected to. So it creates community, like the shared fire escapes, the shared streets. A lot of shows like come up with traditions with other shows, and it's because of the proximity. I've talked to people who are part of theater in, London and Chicago and other really wonderful theater communities that don't have the New York City proximity. And it does impact how the community interacts. Like the fact that we're smushed together can be a really wonderful thing.
You just said it when I asked the question, it's as difficult as asking what's your favorite musical. I mean, what's your favorite play and what's your favorite musical?
One of my favorite musicals for many years has been Merrily We Roll Along, and it changed my life as a kid.
Jonathan Larson was a protege of Stephen Sondheim.
Yes. And actually we've been talking about that so much because Jonathan actually observed rehearsals for Into the Woods, the original, because of Sondheim. And I have a bunch of letters between Jonathan and Sondheim that, we've looked at in rehearsal. So Merrily, it blew me away as a kid because I thought that just all of the things that it was doing.
How did you see it?
This is a great question. It was the cast recording. I was obsessed with the cast recording, but the first production I ever saw of Merrily was when I was an NYU student, and it starred Lauren Marcus, who's now one of the stars of the Jonathan Larson Project. And it was directed by John Simpkins, who's directing the Jonathan Larson Project, before I ever knew either of them. Like that was my first exposure to them. So Merrily is sort of tied to the Jonathan Larson Project.
Wow. Oh my God.
We're all connected in weird, theater is like that.
And what is your favorite play?
My favorite play is great question. I really, really love Stereophonic. Did you get to see it?
No.
It was so good. It was so good.
Honestly, and like this is my mental illness. I was like, this thing is almost 4 hours. I mean, going back, I was like, I don't know if I can sit there for that long.
I get it.
I mean, I want to see it, but also I couldn't get tickets. It was like literally ending its run, or I think it just ended. And you literally couldn't get tickets. Even if you wanted to pay a higher price, you couldn't.
Yeah, it's so funny. Like theater, it definitely has responded to the marketplace thing of supply and demand where like, Stereophonic, like you could have gotten tickets for $40, but like then you can't get tickets for $600. And it's all like that airline pricing model where it's like, theater used to be the same price before scalping became in the picture as it is now. You would go see, Cats on one day and it would be the same price as it was 2 years later. And now it's, it's variable pricing like airlines.
Have you seen Gypsy with Audra?
Yeah.
I haven't seen it yet, but I'm going to. If I have 10 friends, I'm telling you 50% of them loved it and 50% of them have a lot of notes.
This is one of my favorite things about theater though, because it's like I really believe there's no such thing as good and bad musicals. There's musicals you love and musicals someone else loves. And
I like that.
They're really
musicals you love and musicals somebody else loves.
It's true. I almost never will give people just like blanket recommendations when they come to town because I'm like, I want to give you recommendations for you, or like, why don't you read about these 3 shows and pick one from those 3? It's people like different things. And I think as assuming that everyone's going to like the same thing. I love when you go to Gypsy and then you fight with your friends about, you know, how amazing, like that's what theater should be. I hope people leave the Jonathan Larson Project fighting about certain things. Like that means that theater is speaking to actual topics and doing something important.
With the Jonathan Larson Project, are there any hopes or dreams of getting certain like pop-in special guest performers? You have like a bunch of people, like Adina's doing Redwood, like you just said, like all these people are kind of around, like Adam Pascal lives on Long Island. Has that been like
definitely
a discussion?
Yeah, you know, in the original 2018 concerts, which of course they were concerts, they were different, but we had a special guest each night that did a different song that wasn't in the Jonathan Larson Project otherwise. And definitely we've talked about having some special guest nights at the show. We might, you know, do that after opening where we invite people that are part of the Larson legacy to sing something else of Jonathan's that's not on the show. There are a lot of songs that didn't fit into our show and that are worth hearing also of Jonathan's that would be fascinating. And like how great to reunite some people that have done Tick, Tick, Boom or Rent as well.
You mentioned that you were a consultant for the Tick, Tick, Boom movie with Lin-Manuel Miranda, and Andrew Garfield plays Jonathan Larson in it. What was your biggest contribution?
You know, I got to work with Lynn and Stephen Levinson, who was the screenwriter. And one of the best things we did was we spent a day at the Library of Congress where I was already pretty familiar with the collections at that point because of the Jonathan Larson Project. So I did sort of like a guide for Lynn and Stephen through some of the tapes I thought they'd be most interested in that were related to Tick, Tick, Boom. There is a fascinating recording of a reading of Superbia where then you hear Sondheim giving Jonathan notes on it. We listened to that. Lynn wanted to include other music in Tick, Tick, Boom that was like instrumental or that was bonus music that was not in the original. So in expanding Tick, Tick, Boom into a movie, it was also, you know, Jonathan wrote it for himself initially as a monologue, and then it was expanded into a 3-person show. And eventually it's a film. It has, you know, tons of characters. So I feel really lucky to have been part of the conversations about the characters that got added and fleshed out, the music that got added and put into the movie. And then also, you know, I was talking to each of the actors about their real life counterparts. So when I spoke to, you know, Andrew Garfield or Vanessa Hudgens or the other actors, I could give them dramaturgical material that was related to who they were playing that gave them a full picture of that person. So I was really lucky to be working on that. And a lot of the material has overlap with what we've worked with in the rehearsal room on the Jonathan Larson Project.
I want to talk about 54 Below. 54 Below has been open for how long?
Opened in 2012.
Opened in 2012. You've been with them for pretty much their entire...
Yeah, I came on board in 2013.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So here's my first thought question about 54 Below. To what degree, if any, did you have any involvement in Countess Luann's first cabaret show filmed for The Real Housewives of New York? Directed by Ben Rimmelauer.
Yes, sweet Ben Rimmelauer. You know, I was lucky to get to program her show. And so when I talked to her agents and her folks about bringing her to our stage, it was very exciting. You know, anytime we get a celebrity on our stage, cabaret is Broadway stars, but it's also like reality show stars. It's also people who are just starting out. And I love that 54 Below can give an audience to all of them. And Countess Luann's shows at 54 Below are legendary.
I think she really raised the profile of 54 Below.
Sure.
Like, I think Countess Luann and 54 Below are inextricably linked.
I love that you say that because we were really proud. I mean, it was a cultural moment. My cousins, who I'm really close with, who are not necessarily theater people, it's like their favorite thing at 54 Below. So I'm proud. I'm really proud that we got to have Countess Luann.
What is the most difficult part of your job? So you are the creative director and the program and the director of programming. So is it your job to fill the calendar, basically?
Yes. So as the creative and programming director, you know, we do over 700 shows a year. It's very different than a job where you're doing the same show 8 times a week. You know, we have 2 shows every night. We often have 14 different shows in a week. And it's my job to program the venue, and it's done in a specific way so that we can, you know, run, so that we can operate. And it involves negotiating ticket prices, negotiating which performers are coming in and what the shows are and the number of performances and how the shows are marketed. We have have like an incredible full service tech team, you know, advertising and press team. But a lot of it is making sure that, you know, if someone books a movie and all of a sudden we have an empty week that's a month away, it's my job to make sure we have a show in that spot that can sell enough tickets so that we stay operational. So it's really like never a dull moment, around the clock kind of job. And I love it. I do love getting to work with all kinds of different artists. Like you have Patti LuPone at 7 p.m.
I was just going to say,
you know, like you have an emerging writer at 9:30 p.m. So many of the people that since 2013 I've programmed have now gone on to, like, you know, we did Ben Platt's first solo show, Bonnie Milligan, Ariana DeBose, Jessica Vosk, like these people have gone on to like incredible things. And writers, you know, the shows that we've done in concert that have gone to Broadway, like Be More Chill and Strange Loop. It's so nice being like a hub for theater people that are at all points in their career.
I mentioned that Anthony Rapp and Adam Pascal are coming back. Is there anything you can tease that's going to be like a don't miss this, like something exciting, like on that level,
you know,
that's coming up through, you know, in the coming months through the summer, anything that we can get kind of like a tease for?
Absolutely. So one thing that popped to mind immediately is Norbert Leo Butz, who actually, he played Roger on Broadway after Adam Pascal, and he was covering Mark and Roger, also part of the Rent legacy. He's returning to 54 Below in March with his show that's called Girls, 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 where it's all songs about like women in his life, like music about muses and women. And it's an incredible show that he hasn't done in, I want to say like 8 years. He's one of the most incredible artists we have on our stage all the time, but this specific show is like must see.
Is it original music?
It's some original music and a lot of not original music. And there's an album of it, and it's a full band, and he's updated it since the last time he's done it. But it's like a cross between a theater piece and a cabaret. Like it has a through line. It's really an incredible show-stopping cabaret.
Is there any act that has just been like, you're like, shit, like it keeps falling through, or like they're like just out of your, like, is there a dream act that like you're close, but like it just like the schedule never works? Like who are some people, or if there's like one act that like would be your dream to have at 54?
It's a good question, because after like, you know, since 2013, like it took me 8 years to book Vanessa Williams. And when we finally did, I looked at my emails and my correspondence with her agents, and I said, like, look at this. This was 8 years ago. We started talking about this. And because I'm super organized as far as like the paper trails and, you know, keeping track of everything, a lot of the time, like I remember a couple years ago, I tried to get Will Swenson for so long, and I really wanted him to do a show at 54 Below. And I ran into him on 9th Avenue with like, I was with a friend and he was with Casey Levy, who, you know, I'm also friends with. And because we ran into each other like at 2 a.m. on 9th Avenue, then we did his 54 Below show. It was like making that connection in person. It was an ultimate New York City story. So there's still some people, you know, Sutton Foster is like one of my Broadway heroes. She has yet to do a 54 Below solo show. That would definitely be a dream. But all the time there are new people. You know, every Broadway season I go and I'm like, we need a full headliner week of like Helen Shen, who's the lead in Maybe Happy Ending. There's always new people that start, you know, being dreamed of. And then 4 years from now, I'll be like, we started that in 2025.
I love that. What do you think is ripe to be reconceived as a movie? With the success of Wicked, there hasn't been a success like this since Chicago, I would say.
Yeah.
What do you think would maybe be, I mean, Merrily, like, is that ever going to be done?
Yeah, I mean, they're making it in the most fascinating way over the course of 20 years. Like,
but like, we're all going to be dead by then. I mean, okay, like I'm not. That doesn't seem realistic.
I think it's Follies. I still am dreaming of that Follies with John Hamm. You know, as you know, we have to. I think there's a way to do a movie musical Follies, but it would never be Wicked. Wicked is a commercial title in a way that it just transcends. Like I understand why it's as good and as famous as it is. And the movie reaches, you know, every person who wants to see a movie.
Couldn't they do Hamilton easily?
They could definitely do Hamilton. I think because the show is the way the show is, I don't know. I wouldn't be surprised if we got a big hit Hamilton movie in a few years, but you wouldn't be, it would really need to be kind of reconceived for film. And I'm sure it could be very brilliantly.
This has been so fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I could literally like, I'm like, I think I could go to drinks with you and like, she's like,
I know. It's honestly
what do you think about this? What do you think about
You're
this?
so good to talk to. It's why I feel like I'm talking so fast, because I'm like, these are such good questions and there's so much good stuff to talk about.
Okay. So here's what you need to know. Jonathan Larson Project, beginning performances, Valentine's Day, running for a lot longer than I thought. Like, that's great.
16 weeks.
16 weeks is incredible. And if people want to check out your books, which tells these untold stories of Broadway through the eyes of the theater, you can buy these anywhere?
You can buy them anywhere.
And there are 4 editions of it so far.
There are 4 editions. Some of my autograph books are at 54 Below. You can get them at the Drama Bookshop or the Museum of Broadway. I often will go to those places and sign books. So if you want an autographed one, you can get them
Fun.
there. Yeah.
I love that. Where can everybody buy tickets? And if people are interested, I mean, I guess check out 54 Below.
Yeah. So the JonathanLarsonProject.com, you can buy tickets. Come see us at the Orpheum. There's a lot that you'll experience in person at the theater that I think you'll be really excited by. And, follow me at Jen Ash Tepp. I'll keep you updated on any book stuff and 54 Below stuff. 54below.org. Check out. We have, as I said, 700 shows a year, something for everyone.
Damn, 700 shows. How many of them do you go to?
It's a great question.
In any given week?
Right now, not very many, because we're in the Jonathan Larson Project process. Normally of the 14 shows a week, I usually see about 3, which sounds like not a lot out of 14. And then you're like, wait, that's like over 150 shows a year.
Thank you so much. You're so fun.
This was great. So much.
Everyone, please follow me, JessXNYC, on Instagram. Go over to the YouTube channel, Hot Takes and Deep Dives. Throw in my name. All of these interviews are available on YouTube to watch, and you'll see you soon.